Compliance is a profession where people work tirelessly to make the world a better place. And there are hundreds of amazing and inspiring women who have helped the field develop into what it is today. Great Women in Compliance is part of the Compliance Podcast Network, so join Mary, Shirley, and Lisa Fine as they talk with women in compliance who are making a difference.
Welcome to the Great Women in Compliance Podcast with Lisa Fine and Mary Shirley. I'm Mary Shirley, and I have Lisa Fine here with me. We are doing another one of our joint episodes, which is de rigueur for us, coming out of a 2-week seasonal break. So to welcome the fall as a nod to my adopted home currently of the United States, or autumn for all of the New Zealanders and others utilising that term, we welcome you to this episode, which is all about the Great Women in Compliance book that Lisa and I have been working on. For those of you who don't know about it, we're going to give you a little bit more information today. And for those of you who do know about it and were curious for an update, that will be the focal point of today's topic, as well as some behind-the-scenes thoughts from Lisa and myself as first-time authors. So,
hey, Mary?
Yeah.
I would just like to make one comment. I would like to tell my friends in New Zealand that welcome to spring.
Exactly. So anyone from my side of the world, apologies that it's upside down. I refer to the fall season as actually the spring season for us back home. So indeed, Lisa, thank you for
I'm sorry, I just couldn't resist. It just so there. I had to throw in, as a, American born in Buffalo, New York, I had to throw in the New Zealand time of year for you.
Well, so. I love that because there are a lot of Americans who I think occasionally forget that there are a whole lot of other countries out there, and I know it's easy to get caught up in the America's the focal point or the center of the universe, and even I've suddenly found myself caught up in that way of thinking. So I'm so grateful to you for remembering to customize for our wider audience. And of course, New Zealand oftentimes, for some strange reason, tends to be in our top 5 listeners, which is quite bizarre given that we have very few international or regional headquarters of multinational corporations in New Zealand. So thank you for the Kiwis who loyally listen in anyway.
Yeah, it's all Mary Shirley, so...
It's all my friends and family who I bribe to listen in. All right, so let's start off somewhat at the beginning, which tends to be a great place to commence. So, Lisa, I really cannot remember precisely when this was now, as the pre-COVID days genuinely feel like a lifetime ago. But I do remember very well sitting in my office, which I haven't visited since March, taking a call with you from Sarah Hadden, who is from Corporate Compliance Insights. She also has a publishing company, CCI Press, and she wrote to us to ask if we would entertain an idea that she had. And she proposed to us a Great Women in Compliance book and that we collaborate with her on that. And you and I did not take much convincing from what I recall. And we were absolutely delighted to be invited to partake in this opportunity. And from that phone call, we started planning and brainstorming. And I use the term we quite loosely, given that you and I are amateurs in this area and Sarah is the professional and expert. And so we largely defaulted to her. But that's essentially the idea for how the book came about. And Sarah's concept was that it would be a book that would be ideal for gifting during the end of year holiday period. And it was something that would be somewhat light, not heavy reading, and would be inspiring and motivating and really celebrate the community of great women in compliance globally. And I know that we reconsidered as COVID approached whether it would still be appropriate to publish within 2020. And I think the consensus from all of us unanimously was that in fact, if anything, 2020 was an ideal time. If ever there was a time when we needed lightness, when we needed joy, when we needed a reminder of our community of support, and all of that kind of fairy dust happy stuff, this was the year for it. And so we decided to proceed. I know a lot of things were delayed or postponed or outright cancelled this year, but the GWIC book is not one of them. And so we have stuck with our plan, and we will be launching very shortly, in fact, in the autumn for the United States / spring for Team New Zealand and Australia this year. So keep a look out for that. We've got more details. Lisa, anything else you wanted to talk about for the origins of the book?
No, I think that one other thing just to remember when we were talking about whether or not we would move forward or postpone is this is a project that we actually could all do remotely, and all of the people involved in it would be able to do that as well. So I think that it seemed like it would still be a good time, as good of a time as any, like you said. And it wasn't something where any of us needed to be in person. We would have liked to be at some point right together, but I think that, the process went very smoothly with that, and with Sarah's expert guiding hand in this, because I don't know what we could have done without that. I mean, I was so honored and thrilled that first day. So I think that's what I would add.
Yeah. And, on that point about everything being remote, for me, as many of you know, I was stuck, for want of a better word, at home in New Zealand for 9 weeks of lockdown this year. And it was not only, of course, possible to work on the book from home and from a totally different, the most annoying time zone ever. But it actually gave me really something to look forward to during a tough time when all the days seemed to melt into one. It was like, and it has been Groundhog Day for what feels like forever now. So having this project to work towards has really, for me personally, it's really helped. And there was a friend who put on Facebook something about how, don't feel bad if during lockdown you have not learned a new language or written a book. And I sort of obnoxiously wrote in there, oh, well, I'm publishing a book. So, yeah. So for me, it was a real beam of light for us to be able to keep striving and keep working towards something.
Yeah. All right. So I think the next thing we wanted to talk about related to that is whether this book was only for GWIC listeners, and sort of as a follow-up and related thing is what's different about the podcast versus the book as a whole. I think that the biggest thing to think about is that the book is for everybody. That was one of our intentions from the beginning. You're not going to hear, an analysis of the FCPA or experiences that people were having, with different sorts of issues or helplines or some of the things that we talk about so frequently or the areas we're very often in the podcast. We're also celebrating the women that we speak with, but also their areas of expertise. I think, there is a substantive component in that. I'm not saying that what we have throughout the book is not substantive, but it's a different kind of substance. It's about experience. It's about life, as it's, good experiences, embarrassing things, lessons learned, mentors. So where in the podcast, we may talk a little bit about, how to be a mentor, or what to learn, what I've learned from my mentoring versus, advocacy or things like that. In the book, you might actually speak about your mentor or an experience that taught you the difference between good and bad mentors, or, some other things like that. I mean, that's just one of the examples for us. I think that it is similar in that the people that we focus on are obviously women in compliance, but the experiences and the lessons are very human. I think that was our intent, and aspirational, and also community based. What about you?
Yeah, I would echo that completely. And while I would say that we are, of course, compliance centric in many ways, I think a lot of the topics that we talk about on the podcast do have good multi-industry crossover. And in several of our episodes, what we've talked about is industry agnostic. I would say that goes further. for the book. And so it would be very cool, I think, if it transpires that, say, HR professionals are referred the book to read because people have enjoyed it and think that their friends in that area, or working in law firms, not in the white-collar crime area, would also enjoy it. I think there is a good chance of that happening, and I'm excited about it because one of the things that I know you and I together value is over-inclusiveness, where we can facilitate that.
Yeah. And I think about it. I remember when we started the podcast, I've told this story before, but I mean, we had no idea what was going to happen or if we were going to have listeners. And we're thrilled that now this has evolved into this next step. But I remember my mother listening to one of the early episodes that was fairly, substantive heavy. She was like, it seems very interesting, but it's a little dry. So I said to people, at the beginning of our experience that I thought we'd have, maybe 50 people listen, including my family. And then my mother said it was dry. And the reason I say that is my mom couldn't be prouder of me, but she is excited about this book. And I feel somebody, like my mom or others who aren't in the field, this isn't so field heavy, like you said, that it really is enjoyable. Like if you know somebody who submitted, or, family members of someone, you understand some of the things they go through more. So
that's a great point. How to understand your compliance officer's spouse. We could have a line of demand specifically for that.
So, yeah, that's what I thought that. So it is, I think it is, you've got some of the same base of people who are passionate about all this, but it's different in terms of the focus and sort of the style of it too.
Yeah. And I think leveraging off that comment, it brings us really nicely as a segue into the next area that we wanted to discuss in this episode, which is what's the book really about and what are some of the key themes that we've noticed. And I'd love to start off this area by talking about what the book is not, which I sometimes find an easier way to describe items or concepts. So what the book is not, I would say, is that it is not a compliance textbook. There are some good examples of those out there. Tom Fox and Dina King, friends of the podcast, each of them have released books that I would more closely describe as being very substantive in terms of looking at core compliance concepts and concrete subject matter to do with ethics and compliance. Christy Grant Hart has done a wonderful series which really focuses on a lot of the soft skills that you need in compliance. And so our book is really another area I would suggest. It looks at how to thrive in compliance. It especially looks at how to thrive despite obstacles that you may have encountered, which of course is always incredibly inspiring and I think also really easy to relate to when I think we know in concept that not everybody gets to where they are with zero work and, by pure luck and with one hair flick, they're there. But actually hearing some people's stories and people that you may well know by name, if not personally, who are very big names in the field, I think that's an incredibly interesting aspect of what this book provides. And so to me, that's a big part of it. And some of those key themes that I've mentioned are overcoming adversity, learning from mistakes, how great women in compliance have advanced and matured and grown throughout their careers. There is some really great advice in there. And I would hazard to say, I know I'm not one of the great veterans in the field, but I would guess that no matter how experienced you are, that there would still be something either new or very comforting to read in the book. And I'll check on that by asking friend of the podcast, Ellen Hunt, later on what she thinks. But that's my hazard of a guess for now. What about you, Lisa? What is the book about to you?
Well, I think that some of that is I would also say one of the things is it is really celebrating this community as a whole, whether it is the big names or whoever put something in or whoever defines what that may be. I've never thought about that. But the idea that anyone, this was a self-selected group of submissions. So these may be people you've heard of. It may also be someone you didn't know about before, but somehow it's inspiring. It's really all about, the women who made the submissions for this book are involved in the book at some point. And I think that is an exceptional group. And you have people who are from all over the world, different stages of their careers, people who may have written a tome and people who may have, had a couple career changes. And I think that one of the parts of that is that I just love is that we are being able to have this sense of community. If we often talk about the seat at the table, getting the seat at the table. This table had as many extensions as we wanted. If you wanted to be at the GWIC table for this, we were thrilled to have you.
If I can just interrupt with a Mean Girls reference, you can sit with us.
And I will just say, you don't have to wear pink on Wednesdays either. But I do think, we want everybody to, and I think everyone has something to share that they've learned or that's important to them in their careers. And we can learn lots of people. And I love the fact that this was that kind of process. It was, in that way, it was intended to keep being as inclusive or over-inclusive as possible.
Absolutely. And I think that's something, not to sort of self-compliment us too much here, but it's a principle that we've tried to keep in mind with the podcast as well, right? Like, obviously there's a reason why the people on the speaking circuit are on the speaking circuit. It's because they're very good at what they do. It's because they're known for being able to add value, to be thought leaders, and to really help move the dial in our industry in a certain way. But what we've also done, I think, that's been important is looking out for voices who are not just the same people that you see speaking again and again on the conference circuit or in podcasts or having so-called appearances at places. We have looked at people who maybe a little more quiet on that front, and we want to make sure that their voices are amplified as well.
Right. I mean, that goes back when people often ask us, how do we pick podcast guests? There's not some complicated process. And same with your book authors. It's if you have something that's interesting to bring to the table that you want to discuss, you're at the table. And everybody pretty much has something they're doing at this point that they want, that is worth sharing and worth learning from. So I guess with that moves on a little bit. What was the biggest surprise for you in the process of doing the book?
Yeah. So Lisa, you've been incredibly community focused in this episode, and I'm almost embarrassed to have the answer to this question be very Mary centric, but it is. So please indulge me, dear listener. I think for me, and some of you who listen in regularly may be aware that while I'm conscious of the fact that public speaking is typically a strength of mine, my writing is just kind of average. And so my whole life, I've always loved the idea of being an author, but it was always a pipe dream. It was something that I thought, wouldn't this be fantastic? But it's not going to be for me. And during this process, to have had the editorial team complement certain aspects of my writing, one that's been fantastic from a personal growth perspective in terms of feeling like I'm coming and, to a certain point of improving that area, and it felt very validating. So for me, one of the biggest surprises in this whole process was something that was really just a wonderful daydream is now turning into a reality for me. And for those of you who attended our session at the SCCE conference in National Harbour last year, you may recall this has happened before in my life, where moving to the United States was something that really at times seemed really difficult. You can't just sort of turn up in the US and start living and working. It's quite difficult. And so this is two things for me now that seemed almost impossible at first blush. But in the end, it transpires that nothing really is impossible. What about for you, Lisa?
Well, first of all, I mean, about writing, I find writing to be a challenge also. And I mean, basically at this point, I feel like I write much better in bullet points, which is pretty much the way to write a book. But I will say I also didn't have the same fear you did, because I have always believed that the best books actually have the best editors. And I knew that, like, no matter, even if I initially made a mess, then eventually I would, even if no matter that Sarah would be able to, basically fix it and help us do better. So I was not nearly as scared about that as you were, or concerned, because I knew that we had this stopgap, for better or worse. For me, I am going to go a little more community on this. Like, I couldn't believe how many people were interested, how many people cited, that submitted, that suggested people to submit. I just felt like that was tremendous. It was just like, people asking to send information. I mean, it really made me feel good. That part, I think, was not that I didn't think people would be interested, but I didn't expect that level of excitement. And I don't hope that doesn't come off as self-congratulatory towards us, but it was really, like, it was just cool. You would sort of remember seeing submissions come in, and then you'd read them and they were fantastic. It was just such a, heartwarming thing with that. So.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent. And so that brings us to another question, which would be, what was the most challenging part for you?
I think I just talked, a little bit about not knowing what to do, or being part of this process. And again, I'm being happy we had a good editor, because at the beginning, it's like, great, we want to write a book. Okay, how do you actually do that? How do we do what we need to get done for this? So for me, that part was what was really daunting and scary. Can we do this right? And what am I supposed to do next? Okay, I've written what I'm thinking I'm supposed to write, but is this really what our intention is, or what we're trying to do?
I guess mine is similar. So the whole needing to be directed and guided. And in the end, my answer to this question would be that nothing was as challenging as I expected in the process, because the editorial and publishing team was able to inform us and guide us so very well. I actually if we'd self-published anything, if we'd ever thought to do that, I think I would have been like a chicken with my head cut off. It would not have been a very comfortable process, I suspect. So in the end, this totally unknown process to us, we were lucky that we had people to hold our hand. I think that was super helpful. We were lucky that we had experts. So in the end, it was a lot easier than I had anticipated that it would be.
Yeah, I think I'll just add one other thing. The time management of it was also a little bit daunting to me, between work, trying to do the podcast, real life, COVID, everything else. I feel like at some points, I never felt like it was so challenging, it was unsurmountable. But there were times where I felt like, wait, I feel like there are so many deadlines and there's so many unknowns. I mean, even, how you'd have your day-to-day COVID life that you were adapting to. So while that didn't slow us down, it sometimes took a feeling of surreal with, this is, I've got to get stuff done for the book, and I want to do this well, and this job and everything. So I do feel like some of that was a little bit challenging, but it was, everything was always reasonable too. So it wasn't that much, but I do think back on it and think, suddenly it was kind of, the to-do lists were quite long, in the most positive and exciting of ways. But suddenly, this was something I really, really wanted to do right. And at times it was, it was challenging. But then, all of us, everybody who's listening right now, balances life.
Yeah, I can so relate to that in many ways. And interestingly, not for this particular project. And the reason why I raise this is just in case there's anyone out there who's got a sort of a dormant wish to write a book someday. Whenever I question myself about whether I could write a book in more recent history, it always came back to, I don't really have anything to write about who would want to read my stuff. And the more I thought on it, the less I sort of came up with to be able to write on. And then what I found was when we'd settled on our topics and you and I were assigning ourselves our chapter introductions, the words came so fast for me. I think you'll remember there was one time I did all of my chapter introductions within the space of an hour or two. And so what I would say to anyone who would really love to do this but is thinking that they don't have anything there, you'll never really know until you try. So if it is something that you think you might like to do, and even if you don't think you have something that somebody necessarily wants to read, try sitting down with a pen and your ideas and see if the thoughts flow. Because for me, they came out much faster than I had ever anticipated. And whilst there were a lot of other things going on that I can 100% relate to about your description there, Lisa, for some reason, the book was almost my break from all of the other stuff that I felt was hounding me in terms of having to get stuff done, tick off things on my list and bow down to deadlines. For some strange reason, this was easy, and it was not something that I was expecting to be.
And I would just make one comment about that, about Mary's and my working styles, because I remember that day very clearly, because it was a Friday afternoon where I was like, I had a whole plan in my mind of these introductions I'm going to do this day. This is the next, this is what I'm doing Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And I just remember while I was finishing this thing at work, like Mary would come up with this like brilliant, interesting introductions. And I would look at that and I'd be like, I can't. Am I behind? What am I doing? But it was amazing. So it's just so funny because our work styles are very different that way. And, within a couple of days, I caught up on my own schedule. But I do remember thinking, I was like, wow, she's really good. She's got it all going right now.
Thank you.
And it was just it was like a kind of happy day. And it was also a reminder of how we work differently day.
Thank you for the kind words, Lisa.
But both of them worked really, it worked out really well.
Yeah.
The following week, we were where we should be, and we were able to talk about what each other were doing. But I just remember thinking, so for those of you who have that moment of, how am I going to keep up with this? It works out.
Yeah, the panic monster comes sometimes as well. I find that a good trigger.
Yeah. And Mary knows me well enough that in the middle of us, she was doing this, she said, don't stress out. I just got very inspired. Because she knew.
This was coming at a time where I think I was working somewhere in the region of between 60 and 65 hours a week for work. And so this came as just such a release for me, being able to work on this after some very intense periods of my core job, that I was able to use this in a very, direct that, I don't know if stress is the right word, but just I had a lot of thoughts building up, a lot of emotion, and it was able to direct it into the writing. So you and I have different ways to get from point A to B, but we always see each other at B.
And we get there, yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess right now, we should close off talking a little bit about the launch of the book. What are you most looking forward to about the launch of the book and how we're planning to do that?
Yeah, mine's a hope rather than something that's, guaranteed that we're definitely going to see or hear about. But for me, it would be that, this is something that you talk about a lot, Lisa, how compliance can be an incredibly lonely discipline at times. And I'm thinking back to times when I've been a one-man band, or I've been head of a region with no other, physical compliance staff, in the same region as me. And I'm hoping that this book provides company for people. It provides validation, and it provides some ideas, some inspiration, and, absolute best case scenario. And you and I have been lucky to hear about this regarding the podcast on occasion previously. What it would be amazing to hear about regarding the book is if anyone who reads it manages to hear advice or apply advice from one of the great women in compliance and finds that it dramatically changes their life course or their career course, that would be the thing that I'm looking forward to the most, is just the prospect of that, and how shared knowledge can have such an amazing, impactful effect on other people's lives.
Yeah. And I think that part is fantastic. I'm really, personally, I'll say I'm looking very forward to going back and reading all of this in the form that it's in here, and how it's all woven together, and kind of hold on and learn from those experiences, and also appreciate the community of people who helped put this together. And as you said, the people that appreciate it. There's a part of me too, that it's going to be kind of exciting to actually have the book, physical book that I had in my hand. And I just, like you said, it's an accomplishment that frankly, I never really thought I would do. And to be able to have the words of so many people I respect, admire, value, in this thing that we were a part of. So that's what I'm looking forward to, of launching it, and that everybody else gets to see all the things that we've gotten to see.
Yeah, definitely. Me too.
So
great. So in terms of ending on a high note, I think we have a good one for you today. So Lisa and I are in the process of planning the launch event, which essentially celebrates the release of the book. And just like the authoring of the book, it is an open lunch table. You can sit with us. And we hope that several of you will consider attending the session, which we hope to have some form of substantive element in terms of there being a small panel. Lisa and I will be sending out a customized drink recipe to make your own drink, to cheers all of the contributors, to cheers all of the wonderful women in compliance that make our profession so awesome. And then there'll also be a special authors lounge as well. So for those who contributed, we will invite you to an event shortly before the big kahuna with everyone. And it'll be a happy hour in the US. And I'm so thrilled to say that any listeners / supporters in New Zealand and Australia, it will be during waking hours for you, luckily. So the afternoon time symbolizes the future, actually, waking up the very next day in New Zealand and Australia. So we're very pleased that this event will cater to multiple time zones. You may have to get up a little bit early if you're tuning in from Asia Pacific, though.
Yeah. Yep. So more to come on that, more to come on the date, the actual launch date, and announcements about the book. And we are tremendously just so looking forward to it, and really appreciate all of you that have contributed and that are excited about it and have sent good wishes. And hopefully now you're learning a little bit more about what we're trying to do, and we hope you enjoy it or just enjoy the events around it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Great Women in Compliance. We hope you'll join us in honoring the great women in the compliance field by subscribing to this podcast and leaving a review.